Hi, my name is Michala Liavaag and I'm the founder of Cybility Consulting. I've been in IT for over 20 years and spent the last decade leading information governance and cybersecurity programs across various sectors, in particular local government, the NHS and charity sectors. When I founded the company a couple of years ago now, I then branched out and was able to help more organisations, particularly again charities, smaller organisations, which then aligns with my mission, which is about helping, the people who can't necessarily afford the big budgets for cybersecurity to actually have something in place. In terms of my journey into cybersecurity, it's been a bit of a winding one. Some people might be surprised to learn that my degree is in classical music, and I used to run a computer game shop, an internet cafe, and then eventually branched into the IT support, IT service management, project management that eventually led me into cybersecurity. So one thing I just like to point out is that you don't have to have a computer science or cybersecurity degree to work in this field. There's room for everybody. So that's something else that I feel quite passionate about. So one of the things that I see quite a lot on LinkedIn in particular, and also hear from people, is that there's a cybersecurity skills gap, and yes, there are huge gaps in terms of jobs available for people, but all those jobs typically want, excuse me, sort of over 5 years experience, and those people are already busy. You're just not going to generally find that anymore. So I think it's really a case of, it's an experience gap, not a skills gap. People have been trained for the past decade. They've recognised about this skills gap, and there's been lots of different schemes, including, say, the National Cybersecurity Centre's Cyber First, to skill up young people and bring them into the field. And what's typically happening is these young people, they do their certs, they do their little projects, and they go to apply for a job, only to find out, oh well, you've not got 5 years experience, so you can't come in. And it's really frustrating for people. Again, I see people just kind of like, everyone says there's a skills gap, but I'm really struggling to get a job in the field. So obviously, what's going on here? And I think in answer to the what's going on here, it is that organisations have a need right now for skilled people with experience who can just come in and run things, and that's not quite where these people who've been trained up are. So that's why I say it's not a skills gap, it's an experience gap, and it's that needs filling, in my view. And in terms of how that can be filled, because one of the challenges is quite often cybersecurity professionals are spread thin in organisations. Larger ones will have teams of people, but smaller ones might just have sort of 1 or 2 people who are trying to do cybersecurity as part of their day job. So they typically also don't have the bandwidth to bring somebody in and train them up. They really just want somebody to come in, take it off them and run things. So I think there needs to be a kind of mindset shift from employers around, how you can actually achieve, sort of filling the gap in the employment space that you've got. And personally, I think that's about effectively, if you haven't got the bandwidth in-house, using external people with experience to coach and mentor somebody that you bring in to actually then fill that gap. Because it's better, I think, to have somebody who's new to the field but hungry and passionate and wants to do it, because they'll keep learning and sort of ramp up really quickly, but under the sort of guidance of somebody who has been there and done it, to help sort of minimize the risks of them going off piece and doing something they shouldn't. So that's kind of why I really say, again, it's an experience gap. So fill it with by proxy, effectively, by using somebody else. So this is a really difficult question, I think, because that there's wider issues at play than simply it's not necessarily that people from diverse backgrounds don't want to, but for example, if your family can't afford a computer, for example, that immediately makes it very difficult for you to set up a home lab, for example, to practice on. So I think that there are some sort of other factors that need to be considered. It's not simply a case of letting people know that this career could be for you. That said, that is one of the reasons why a couple of years ago I sort of came out of my shell a little bit and started speaking, and I'm also a STEM ambassador, because when I was growing up there wasn't anyone who I could sort of look up to and sort of see in this field, and I mean, I was quite fortunate, I'll say, that at my school, it was an all-girls grammar school, our teachers, we had 2 women job sharing teaching computer science. So from that perspective, it never occurred to me that computers wasn't for women from that perspective. But as a Black person from a working class background, there were more challenges than that. So what's the solution? I suppose it's a multi-pronged one, and I can't really give that a nice straight answer. But what I can say is that we need more people like me putting their head over the parapet and showing, look, if I can do it, you can too. As I said at the start, you can take a winding journey. You don't have to necessarily go for that sort of science degree. And I think one of the things I'd really like to see is more apprenticeships that are hands-on. If you sort of think back, I don't know, 50 odd years, it was normal for people to leave school without skills, without experience, without a trade. They'd go into a trade in an organization, and they would learn that trade in the organization. So again, I said earlier about an employer's mind shift, and it's kind of like, how did we go from people come in to learn a trade to they need to come in already fully fledged professionals? So that's where I think a huge difference can be made, and I think for a lot of people that will be a easier route to access the profession than, say, the traditional uni route. One other area that I think employers could sort of take a bit of a mind shift on in terms of diverse recruitment is the over 50s. I do find it quite surprising, as somebody who's just 1 year away from that myself, to see these headlines where people are saying over 50s are struggling to find work, they're considered old and no longer able to provide value to organisations. And I really disagree with that, because those people have the experience. And one of the things that I think I mentioned earlier, that there's room in cybersecurity from everybody, because there's so many diverse sort of specialisms within it. And I think if organisations were to take people who are older with business experience, who can transition into the field, those people will actually ramp up quite quickly and be able to support then the younger people who are coming through as well. So I think it's definitely got to be a case of a sort of mixed jigsaw approach in order to sort of solve this problem.